Ready? Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahano Unaktu Sahaviryam Karavavai Tejasvinavaditamastu Mavidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May Brahman protect us, may he guide us and give us strength and right understanding. May love and harmony be with us all. Om, peace, peace, peace. And good evening. We're live from Hollywood, the entertainment capital of the world here. And no, I don't have a bionic hand. This is a little flashlight hand so that you can, it's really not designed for reading, but I thought it might work for reading. It's designed for when you need to be like Shiva and have 4 arms, one to hold the flashlight and one to hold the screwdriver and one to keep something out of the way. So this at least gives you a little extra leverage. All right, so I'm going to skip a couple of chapters. We've been reading through the various avatars, and I haven't successfully sorted through the Parasurama Avatara, also known as Rama with the battle axe. It's going to take me a while to sort through all those characters so that I can make it intelligible. And we've already read about Krishna in a much more larger context. So I thought we could skip on over to the lecture called Science, Modern and Ancient. And this is really a fairly remarkable lecture. He really covers a lot of solid philosophy here in one chapter. So he starts out with a quote by Sri Ramakrishna. All are mad, some after money, some after enjoyments, some after name and fame, and so on. Be not mad after the unreal, the transitory, but after the real and the eternal. And that, of course, reminds me of the scene in Alice in Wonderland where Alice is wondering which way to go, and the Cheshire Cat tells her she could go see the Mad Hatter and the March Hare, and then he warns her, but they're mad, you know, and she says, well, I don't want to go among mad people. He says, oh, you can't help that here. We're all mad. So the Cheshire Cat and Sri Ramakrishna are in agreement here. All right, so modern science starts with 2 hypotheses, or as it is wont to have them called, 2 primary facts. Man is the one, and the universe around is the other. What does it understand by man? An embodied being, a Mr. So-and-so, having a certain nationality, a faith, and a creed. In short, it understands by the word man, an ordinary man of the world with sound common sense. A man is he who sees, hears, smells, tastes, and touches by means of his senses, and thinks, feels, and wills by means of his mind. And whatever he can observe and experiment upon by means of these senses, he regards them to be a fact, a reality. Everything has to come down to the level of his senses in order to be regarded as a reality, as they alone have the power of establishing the existence of an object by observation and experiment. And of course, by man, we're doing the generic human, but the clumsiness of English, it makes it difficult to put it in a more general desexed way, so we just have to remember that this is the generic man in the human sense. He also finds himself to be full of various wants. Nay, he finds his whole life to be a series of almost incalculable wants. And to his great relief, he finds out at the same time that the world around him has the power to remove them. But also, he finds the world to be perfectly capable. Something's wrong here. Let's see. He finds out at the same time that the world around him has the power to remove them. I'm assuming he's talking about the wants, but then he says, but also he finds that the world is to be perfectly capable of removing them. He has to force it to do so. He has to fight with his environment in order to get from it all that he wants. By mere coaxing words, he can get nothing out of it. He has to wage an incessant war with it to get all he desires. That is why Charles Darwin, the father of modern evolutionism, has described life as a struggle for existence. And he has pointed out that only the fittest survive amidst such a struggle. Of course, this was not that long after Darwin had published, and that theory was still a hotly discussed idea. The poet also has described the world to be a battlefield in the following simple and forceful language. Doesn't say what poet. In the world's broad field of battle, in the bivouac of life, be not like dumb-driven cattle, be a hero in the strife. Whether man wills or not, constituted as he is, he cannot keep quiet here, as that means death to him. He wants to gather power, and he finds out that knowledge brings that much needed power to him. Formerly, electricity used to be regarded as only a destructive force, but now that men have been able to know something about it, they have been able to make it very useful as a carrier of their messages, as motor power, for power for their carriages, as an illuminer of their cities and towns. The knowledge of steam power has facilitated communication from one place to another with incredible rapidity. And thus, they are very hopeful of getting almost all things necessary from the knowledge of the universe in the near future. That is why there is an incessant struggle going on between man and nature. And as a result of such struggle, man has been able to evolve science or right knowledge about persons and things. Wanting to know about the heavenly bodies, he has evolved astronomy. Wanting to know about the animal kingdom, he has evolved zoology. Wanting to know about the vegetable kingdom, he has evolved botany. Wanting to know the elements out of which the world has come into existence, the laws which govern everything around him, the constitution of his physical organism, and the method of its working, the constitution of the world in which he lives, and so on, he has evolved chemistry, physics, anatomy, physiology, geology, and so on. By studying matter, he has found out its indestructible nature. Although the candle has been burnt out, by weighing the gaseous portions of the burnt candle, he has found out that not a particle has been lost. Thus, matter being indestructible is real, and all material bodies are, on that account, real as well. And as the universe is composed of material bodies only, it also must be real. So he's going through the arguments of the materialist Western scientists, basically, as to why they regard the universe that we perceive with our senses as being real. By the study of this material universe, we get whatever we want. Hence, its study is absolutely necessary. Speculation about the eternal nature of souls is useless, as being immaterial. Souls cannot be brought within the scope of observation and experiment. Now, what sort of universe has been given to us by our modern science? Assuredly, a soulless one. It is a universe that does not respond to our call. By sheer exertion, we ourselves are required to get out of it all that we want, both physical and mental. Again, the universe is so very infinitely vast, and our capacities are so deplorably limited, that it is absurd on our part to entertain any hope of knowing it as a whole, and hence our knowledge about it will always remain undesirably partial. So he's setting himself up here to give another interpretation from the Eastern perspective. He says, now the indestructibility of matter was not unknown to our most ancient sages. Kapila, Gautama, Kanada, Patanjali, Jaimini, and many others knew its indestructible nature. By way of illustration, I should like to narrate to you the incident that almost destroyed the dynasty of the Yadavas by bringing it to an end the blissful career of Sri Krishna and all his relatives, children and grandchildren. Knowing the all-powerful Rama and Krishna to be their saviors in all crises, now that Rama is the brother of Krishna, not the earlier Rama. Their children and grandchildren became very proud, insolent, and irreverent. They used to spend their time mostly in mirth and jollity. Of all the children of Sri Krishna, Samba was the most beautiful. One day, some of the children of Sri Krishna dressed him as a woman big with child, an iron mace serving the purpose of his embryo. I think fetus was probably a better word there, but anyway. And they took him to almost every house in Dwarka to know whether the inmates who had known Samba very well could make him out in his new garb. And when they failed to recognize him, the jolly party had a very good laugh at their cost. As they were thus marching from house to house to one another, they came across the great sage Durvasa. And such was their insolence and irreverence that they took Samba even before him and wanted to know what child the seeming woman would give birth to. The sage, however, came to know all about the fraud by his spiritual insight, and being naturally of a highly choleric temper, replied that the child that this seeming woman will give birth to will bring about the destruction of all of you and the whole family to which you belong, you stupid and irreverent fellows. Then they were all taken aback, and knowing that their irreverence and vanity had brought down the wrath of the Brahmana upon the whole clan, were sorely afraid and went directly to Baladeva's house to be advised as to what was to be done to alleviate the curse. Hearing all, Baladeva told them to rub out the mace on a stone, and then there would be nothing remaining of it to be feared, as the mace, the cause of their anxiety, would itself not be in existence to bring any trouble to them. Accordingly, they went to a riverside and rubbed out the whole mace in a short time, and threw away a very small residual piece of iron, deeming it quite harmless, and returned home very glad. But they did not know that very minute particles of the rubbed-out mace grew into a forest of reeds on the riverside, and the remaining small bit of the mace was swallowed up by a fish, which was afterwards caught by a fisherman. When its body was cut open, the little piece was found out by the fisherman, and he gave it away to an archer, who made an arrowhead out of it. After a few weeks, Rama and Krishna, together with their whole family, had a grand picnic very near the place where the mace had been rubbed out. Wine was freely circulating among the whole party. At first, all were very jolly. Then they began to find fault with one another, which ended in a bloody quarrel. In the scuffle that ensued, they used up all their weapons and found nothing but the reeds that were standing hard by. They rushed toward them, and each one plucked a reed, wherewith to strike his opponent. Whoever was even slightly struck with one of them had to fall down dead on account of the irresistible curse of the sage. In a few minutes, all died except Rama and Krishna, who had not taken part in the quarrel, but were simply sitting quiet to see the destruction of all the children. When death brought silence over the whole place, Rama went out of his body by yoga, while Sri Krishna, seeing himself alone, climbed a young fig tree and sat on a branch with one of his legs hanging down. His beautiful feet dangling from the branch were mistaken by an archer from a distance for a very beautiful bird of blue feathers and red breast, and he shot at them, that arrow whose head was made of that last remnant of that destructive mace. As soon as the arrow struck his foot, he fell down from his seat, but he did not leave his body at once, as he wanted to see his friend Arjuna, so that he might leave instruction to him to take care of his old father, mother, and wives. And of course, that ties into another story of Sri Krishna and how he was destined to be killed by an arrow by this particular archer. So that's kind of another story. As the above narrative shows the indestructible nature of matter, however you may try to destroy it, it will baffle all your attempts to do so. Some years ago, scientists believed that they arrived at a final division of matter which could not be divided anymore, and which on that account they named atom, the Greek for not, and term 9, to cut. But after the discovery of electrons, which are finer than atoms, that theory has fallen to the ground. Again, ethereal particles are regarded as even finer than electrons, and perhaps some still finer particles may be discovered in the future, which will make even ether appear as coarse. Thus, however, you may go on analyzing matter, you can never reduce it to nothing. It will always remain something and baffle all your attempts to destroy it. Thus, modern material science has not been able to arrive at a final division of matter, and so it has no firm ground to stand upon, and as such, it is unreliable and empirical. And of course, now the theory is that it's simply the energy, waves and energy, it's disturbances in energy fields that we interpret as particles. So we don't even have particles anymore. Doesn't matter how fine you're going to get them. We don't even have them anymore. They're simply disturbances in fields. And of course, people often talk about converting matter into energy and back and forth and so forth. But in actuality, matter is energy. And it's better to think of it that way. For example, if you, the mass of an object increases if it is separated from the gravitational field of the Earth, because it now has more energy, and you can get that energy back by dropping it, and so forth and so on. And if you dropped something into a neutron star, you'd get a whole bunch of energy back that was stored in that little bit of matter. If you wind up an old grandfather clock, it would technically be more massive, although you're not going to find an instrument fine enough to measure that change in mass, but it has more energy stored in it, so it would be more massive. So the energy is its mass, and so it's a little confusing to say it's actually one is converted into the other, because they're really one and the same thing. But let us take up the conclusion of science and see whether we can make anything out of it. We have learned from it the indestructible nature of matter and also its ever-shifting, ever-changing nature. Every material form is liable to change. Heat expands, cold contracts it. It admits of any number of divisions. The big ones become smaller, the smaller still smaller, and so on. So it is constantly changing. Now let us analyze the phenomenon of change. Whenever any form changes into another, the old form exists no more, or dies, or a new form comes to exist or is born. So the words birth and death may be substituted for the word change. Thus we see that every material form has to change or die unceasingly on a background which is changeless, or is without birth and death. On account of this birthless, deathless, and eternal background, the ever-dying material form is saved from destruction, as it is inseparably united with it amidst all its vicissitudes. So yes, he's really got this quite straight here, that everything in the world is appearing to change, but it appears to change because there's the background of the infinite, undivided, unchanging reality behind it. And Brahman, the infinite, undivided, unchanging, is beyond space and beyond time. And he's going to go into an explanation of that as well, as to how we can understand that existence behind all of this must be beyond change and beyond time and beyond space. Again, space and time and change all arise together, not one at a time. You have to have things in space in order to be able to measure space. And if you have things in space, they're going to be separated in space, and then they're going to change. They're going to change their positions, and it's going to happen in time. Some things have to happen in time. Things don't happen outside of time. So if there's going to be happenings in space, then things are going to change. And so they all come out at once, not one at a time. Now, let us see what sort of thing this eternal background is. Is it formless? No, as in that case, it would also have to die like that which rests upon it. So in other words, Brahman is beyond form. Hence it must be formless, and as every form is limited, that which is formless must be limitless or infinite. The finite form exists on this finite background, but where does this latter exist? Does it exist in space and time? It cannot, since space, whose existence depends upon the coexistence of things, and time, whose existence depends upon the succession of events, are not independent and have therefore beginning and end, or are, in other words, finite. How can the infinite one live in that finite space? Space begins to exist after the coexistence of things, and it ceases to exist when that coexistence ceases. Time begins to exist when two events occur one after another, and cease to exist when no such succession takes place. Again, when two things coexist, they must be known to exist together, which means that one of them must be the knower and the other the known. And this, of course, is the primordial division, you could say, of oneness. When oneness is no longer oneness, it divides into a duality, and that primal duality is knower and known. And then, of course, you have a third, the process of knowing. So, and another way to put this is to think of, in Shankara's terms, if you think of Brahman as infinite, undivided, and unchanging, and Shankara says we are not perceiving it correctly, we're making a mistake, then you have to ask this is kind of going the other direction here, what mistake can you make from the infinite? Well, you could think it's finite. That's about the only mistake you can make. What mistake can you make about the undivided? Well, that it's divided. And what mistake can you make about the unchanging? Well, that it's changing. And so when you get that, you see you have space and time. You've already got, if it's going to be not changeless, but changing, you're going to be in time. And if it's not infinite and undivided, then it's going to be finite divided. And now you've got space and you've got things, and they're going to be changing. So that's looking at it from the other way. He's starting with the kind of the other direction and going and coming to the same conclusion. All right, now he says again, when two things coexist, they must be known to exist together, which means that one of them must be the knower and the other the known. There must also be the mind for this knowledge to arise. So, space conception must be in the mind. Successions of events bring along with it two or more different ideas, also presupposing the existence of mind. For how can there be an idea without a mind to give birth to it? Hence also the time conception exists in mind. Therefore both space and time exist in mind. But is mind limited or limitless? That it is limited requires no proof, and as such, you cannot localize the limitless one in it. Now, of course, what's behind it is limitless, so the cosmic mind is limitless, and our mind is connected to the cosmic mind, but the way we see our individual minds, they're definitely limited. Now, what else is there that exists besides mind, space, time, and the universe that has its basis in them? Only the self. That alone remains. Is this self limited or limitless? It is beyond the three gunas, nature's dispositions or bondages of sattva, rajas, and tamas, or the five koshas, the shis, comprising the three bodies of gross, subtle, and causal. Having nothing to limit it, it is limitless. Here, therefore, we can localize the limitless background of the limited material forms. But you may say that two infinities may clash against each other. Hence, they cannot live together as one and the same, but must live separately. Let us take your affirmation for granted, and let us then examine its validity. So this is going to be what in math they call a proof by contradiction. He's going to assume this and then show that it can't not be so. According to you, there are two infinities. One is conscious and forms the background of all individual selves. The other is unconscious and forms the background of all material forms. Let them be called A and B respectively. We have already shown that A and B are beyond space and time. So, where A and B are, there is neither space nor time. Let us therefore not imagine that A and B live separately, just as you and I are doing. Between you and me, space, one of the greatest separating principles, intervenes, and therefore our separation is possible. If there remains no space between yourself and myself, we both will become one. But you may say that although we may thus seem to be one, still we keep up our two separate individualities. And thus, if we eliminate space away from between A and B, they may appear as one, though they are really two entities. To this we say, as far as space is concerned, you are perfectly right. But by hypothesis, we must have to eliminate time, another separating principle like space, between A and B. In that case, there should not be two distinct or mutually exclusive ideas conveyed by A and B, as two ideas coming one after another will keep up the idea of time, which we want to eliminate. Hence, A and B must be absolutely one, or infinite must be absolutely one, and being conscious of this oneness, which is birth and deathlessness, it is infinitely and eternally blissful. It is the one soul, both of mind and matter, of the internal and the external universe. There is not a single material particle, however minute, be it an electron or an ethereal particle, which is not ensouled by it. That is why our forefathers used to find God everywhere throughout the whole universe. Although it is the one formless background of the whole universe, it appears differently in different forms. To an ordinary man who distinguishes one object from another, the one form from another, to whom the sun is not the same as the moon, the male not the same as the female, it appears differently in different forms. However, an ordinary man of the world is concerned with forms, which he loves most dearly. He loves the forms of his parents, friends, children's, friends, and neighbors, and all the beautiful, charming forms, wherever they are to be found. This is why that infinite one, incarnating itself as teacher, has taught to the men of the world amongst the mountains, I am the Himalayas amongst the trees, I am the holy fig tree, etc. Whatever is grand and glorious, charming and majestic, know I, Arjuna, all that has come out of a part of my own infinite power. Thus, we have taught from time immemorial to worship each grand and glorious phenomenon in nature as God himself. So he's really giving a wonderful explanation here as to how the Vedic mind sees God permeating all beings, even though we see a variety of forms, that in reality the essence behind all those forms is beyond all the forms. It's beyond time, beyond space, beyond causation. It's infinite, undivided, and unchanging. And it is the one Brahman that is the substratum of all that exists. But since it's the substratum of all that exists, it must be in everything that we're seeing. And of course, that's the idea of trying to see God everywhere, even though things may appear to us as being somewhat different. Let's see, there was something else I was going to say, and it's probably slipped my mind. Oh, yes, infinities. You know, in mathematics, it gets rather confusing. Here we're talking about infinity in the ultimate sense. But in math, they came into a big crisis. What was it, maybe turn of the last century or something like that, where they started thinking about the size of infinities. They recognized that there could be different things that we call infinite that are of the same countable size, even though they're different. For example, all the odd numbers and all the even numbers. There's a first odd number and a second odd number. There's a first even number and a second even number. So you could say that they're exactly the same number of even numbers as there are odd numbers. And you could say that they're exactly the same number of each of those as there are counting numbers. And then you can add the negative counting numbers because you just alternate them. You just take 0, 1, minus 1, 2, minus 2, 3, minus 3, and you line those up in a line, and you've got the first one in your set, and the second one in your set, and the third one in your set. So you've made them countably infinite. But then they discovered that the real numbers, even the tiniest set of real numbers, say between 0 and 1, could not be put into one-to-one correspondence with the counting numbers. And so they had to recognize that there was some sort of infinity that was not countably infinite, but uncountably infinite. And then it got worse than that, which I'm not going to get into. It just goes on and on like that. They make sets of all the possible sets of all the different elements in one of these things, and they come up with another infinity. So infinities can be very confusing when you're trying to tie them down, but that's the nature of infinity, right? It's not comprehensible. It's like Brahman. Brahman is not something that is comprehensible to the ordinary mind and the ordinary senses. It's beyond the mind and the senses. It's only experienced in mystical states when you go beyond those. All right, the old Vedic sages are looked upon with pity by Western scholars, as according to the latter, these baby-like people had no idea of God and therefore had to personify living gods, the inanimate powers of nature. After what we have learned just now, this commiseration on the part of the Western scholars is absolutely groundless. And if any man is to be pitied, it is he who has allowed the ignorance to drive the soul out of the entire universe and place himself inside a dead body, making himself as soulless and dead as the body itself. The Vedic sage never personified natural forces. Personification is mere imagination. It is imagining life where there really is none. But if one sees a real living being as living, there is no personification. The Vedic sage actually saw a living sun, a living moon, nay, a living universe. Did Prahlada imagine a living God in the stone pillar? If it were mere imagination, then of it nothing could have come out, as imagination is entirely false. He saw the living God inside the pillar, and so the living God had to come out of it to save his loving devotee. And so what he's building up to is the whole idea of personifying various energies in the universe as particular deities, which I've always explained to the students in world religions classes or even at USC. Sometimes they just kind of, when you grow up in a culture, you just take things for granted and you don't think about them. So I have to make them think about these things and say that you need to think of all these deities as energies. They're personifications of certain energies, and they exist in the universe because all the energy in the universe is Brahman. In physics, there's this curious thing where so many things in physics all add up to nothing. The positive charge all wipes out the negative charge, and the angular momentum all adds up to zero, and the regular momentum adds up to zero. Everything adds up to zero but energy. Energy doesn't add up to zero. And so if you want to think of a correspondence between what is really real in this universe, it seems to be energy. And the energy then, of course, manifests as matter, and we can personify various aspects of it as this deity or that deity. And I think when the cosmic mind, in the form of a large number of individuals, all picture an energy in a particular way, then the energies in the universe will comply and manifest itself to look like that. So we have people that have visions of Shiva and Durga and Kali and all of these different deities because enough people have pictured them that way and worshiped them that way that the energies of the universe, like as Sri Ramakrishna used to say, it's like the waters of the ocean forming icebergs. And so the collective consciousness of all of those devotees allows the infinite waters to coalesce into icebergs of these various shapes that then can be worshipped. All right, so thus we have seen God to be eternal and infinite. Is he one with our souls? In that case, every one of us would be all-knowing like him, and there would not be any variety of souls. But that is not a fact. No man as man is all-knowing. When he frees himself from the limitations of body and mind, even in this life, by means of one-pointed concentration, yoga, he is then not a man. He is one with the infinite one, and hence becomes all-knowing. But an ordinary man who identifies himself with his body and mind, both of which are limited, can also only have only limited knowledge, and that alone he has. Is he also limited in his life? So long as he identifies himself with his body, he has his birth and death. But he is not only an embodied being, but also a thinker. That is, he not only identifies himself with his body, but also with his mind. Moreover, in his healthy or unnatural condition, he seldom identifies himself with his body, for the idea that he has got a body only comes to him when he is reminded of it by some local pain, such as a headache, colic, etc., or when the whole of it is burning, as it were, under a very high fever. Or in other words, the idea of his having a body only comes to him in his unhealthy or unnatural condition. In his healthy or natural condition, he feels as if he has no body. So the natural man is more a mind than a body. With the help of this, that's I think, probably being a little too optimistic about the general populace, but anyway. So the natural man is more a mind than a body. With the help of his mind, he is able to discriminate the permanent from the impermanent, the real from the unreal. He's been living with too many saints and sages, I think. And when he goes on examining and analyzing himself, with the help of it, he finds out that he is made up of three factors: he himself, his mind, and his body. He again finds out that his body is very changeful. It is incessantly changing ever since its embryonic condition. throughout babyhood, boyhood, youth, manhood, etc., and he finds out also that his mind is changing along with it as well. But though his body and mind may be changing, he knows himself to be the same person, the one person who was once a baby, then a young person, then a young adult, and so forth, growing up to be a grown-up adult. He knows he has not changed along with the changes of his body and mind, and so he finds out that he is the one changeless factor amidst the two other ever-changing factors. Now, whenever we observe for a certain length of time a particular thing to be behaving in the same uniform manner, we cannot help believing that it will be going on the same manner always, as there is an innate belief in the uniformity of nature's working in every living being, not only in men, but also in lower animals. This intuitive faith enables us to determine the nature of everything and makes the existence of science possible. Therefore, when I see that I remain changeless, though my body and mind are incessantly changing all through my lifetime, I cannot help determining my nature to be changeless and eternal, or without birth and death. Man, by a little self-examination, is thus able to make out his eternal nature, but he cannot realize his infinite nature until he transcends the limitations of his body and mind. This is the most difficult of all human achievements. And of course, as we've mentioned many times, it's the ego that seems to be the problem. The ego is the thing that sees us as separate from the rest of the universe, and it's the ego that wants us to have this thing or have that thing, or not have this thing and not have that thing. And so it's constantly trying to achieve those goals. And so it's this identification with the ego that seems to be the problem. And as we've mentioned before, the ego seems to be a genetic invention for survival. And so, as Darwin puts it, this nature is the survival of the fittest, and your ego is struggling to allow you to survive, and so it has to distinguish things in the world and give you various likes and dislikes. The next consideration is that if he is eternal, he must have been existing previous to his present life, and that he is going to exist even after it. Was he invested with a similar body and mind in his previous state of existence? A little self-examination again on the part of every person will show him that he reaps only the fruits of his actions. His good actions bring forth good and desirable fruits, while his evil actions bring forth evil and undesirable fruits. Another fact to be remembered is that, as we have just now seen, the eternal and infinite being, whom we call God, equally exists everywhere, must be equally disposed towards all living beings. In him there cannot be any partiality, as, being infinite, his love towards all his creatures must be infinite. From such a God, we can never expect any difference of treatment as regards his children. Then, how to account for the various conditions of his children? We see that one is very affluent circumstances, while another, by him, is starving even from birth. One is honored and respected, another is insulted and vilified, one is happy, another is miserable, one is wise, another is an idiot, one is strong, another weak. Since these different circumstances must therefore be the result of different sorts of action on the part of God's children themselves, they must have been done in a previous state of existence. And as no action is possible without a body and a mind, the soul must have had a similar body and mind previous to the present embodied condition. Thus, my present body has resulted from a past body, and similarly, my past body also was a result of a previously existing body, and so on without end. Now, we have to remember that this is all part of the realm of Maya, and if you try to push that back infinitely far, you run into some difficulties as to what happens in the beginning. And so you have to realize that there really, for a mistake, you see there really isn't a beginning. It's something you're doing now. If you're mistaking a rope for a snake, you're doing it now. It's not something you did yesterday and the snake's still there. You have to still be doing it. So this apparitional universe, since nature is apparitional, it's not a happening in time. It's because Brahman is beyond space and time, so you can't have a happening in time to change Brahman into the universe, not even apparitionally. So it has to, the apparition is not a happening in time. And so this idea of reincarnation is very appealing to explain the circumstances we see, but if you push it back further and further, you have to think of births before human births. And, well, I can sort of understand that cats and dogs and birds could accrue karma in various actions. They seem to do things, some of them seem to be very kind to other creatures, and some of them aren't kind to creatures. You see all these little things in the internet where two dissimilar animals have suddenly become friends and so forth. But then if you keep pushing it back, then you get back into lower and lower forms of life, which are still forms of life. They're still conscious. They're still embodiments of the infinite consciousness. But how does an amoeba do good karma? I don't know. I just can't quite figure that one out. Or a bacteria or something. It becomes rather inscrutable after a while. So you have to remember that this is all the play of Maya, and it's like a big game, and we're just in the middle of it. There was no beginning to it. That's the difficulty. If you're playing chess, you start out in a certain fashion, and then you continue until an end. But Maya is a game that's not like that. It's just happening now, and it's always been happening, and that's just the way it is, and so you just have to accept it. Or get out of it, just why we're here. All right, so we will continue this fascinating lecture on science and modern, science and ancient, they worded that wrong. Science and modern ancient. That's so, science, ancient and modern is what it's supposed to say. All right. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Filled with Brahman are the things we see. Filled with Brahman are the things we see not. From out of Brahman floweth all that is. From Brahman all, yet is it still the same. Om, peace, peace, peace.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Where does metaphysics fit into this equation? That's part of Brahman too.
Yeah.
Perceptions of maybe perceiving.
Well, yeah, metaphysics